This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, Sudan's capital is rocked by violence as the army battles paramilitary forces.
And ultimately, it comes down to power and control and who is going to be the entity to rule Sudan.
Also tonight, experts say Canadian institutions face an uphill battle against cybercrime.
Stats have really shown that we've sort of moved from this being a large group of hackers who are doing it for their own financial benefit to really becoming cyber businesses.
And the Canadian Screen Awards return in person with a plea to spotlight and support homegrown talent.
If you love going to the movie theaters, and please, you got to go and you got to support. That's really the only way that we can keep this thing going.
That's later, but first. In Sudan, heavy fighting raged today between the army and powerful paramilitary forces in the country's capital. Explosions, gunfire, and artillery have been reported in parts of Khartoum, including near the presidential palace and the international airport. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, clashes broke out after a deadline for a transition of power expired this week.
Nada Wani lives near the presidential palace in the capital Khartoum, where she works as an independent policy analyst.
We woke up this morning to sounds of artillery, heavy artillery and gunshots.
Almost 2 years ago, following a popular uprising, 2 Sudanese generals supported a coup d'etat that ousted longtime President Omar al-Bashir. An agreement was negotiated for a transition to a civilian-led government, but the military has delayed giving up control. And tensions between the 2 rival factions, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the paramilitary group the Rapid Support Forces, have increased. A deadline this week to begin the transfer to civilian power came and went with no change. Open clashes erupted in the streets of the capital Khartoum and other cities today, each side accusing the other of attacking first.
The problem is, despite them agreeing in theory, it hasn't been implemented.
Sajin Gohel is an international security expert at the Asia Pacific Foundation.
Ultimately, it comes down to power and control and who is going to be the entity to rule Sudan, and the fact that there is a reluctance to actually share power, and you are witnessing those problems now erupt in the streets of Sudan, including the capital Khartoum.
Today, during a visit to Vietnam, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for an immediate end to the violence and said the international community supports a peaceful transition of power.
It's a fragile situation. There are other actors that may be pushing against that progress, but this is a real opportunity to finally carry forward the civilian-led transition.
The United Nations Secretary General has called for an immediate cease to hostilities, which are having a devastating impact on civilians. Sudan is already going through an economic and humanitarian crisis, with food and fuel shortages now made worse by open conflict. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
This week, websites for more than a dozen Canadian institutions were knocked offline by denial-of-service attacks, including the websites for the PMO, the Senate, and utilities like Hydro-Quebec. Pro-Russian hackers are taking responsibility. Experts say this kind of attack is just one weapon in a new battleground in global conflict, and Canadian authorities say they're prepared. But one specific type of hack is already costing businesses and institutions a hefty price. Kate McKenna explains.
It's a nightmare many Canadians know well. Click an unfamiliar link. Soon, a message appears on your screen. You're being locked out of your files unless you negotiate with hackers. It's called ransomware.
So I've seen ransomware 4-ish times in my career.
Arthur Keach is an IT specialist in BC.
Think of it almost like a door lock that you're putting on your door, but you don't have the key for. And they break off that key, and that key doesn't exist anymore, and hey, now you have to pay $1 million.
Insidious, illegal, and for the culprits, lucrative. Microsoft's annual defense report says ransomware was a multi-billion-dollar industry last year and growing. Canada's cybersecurity agency says it's a national security risk. Keach says he's witnessed ransomware become more sophisticated.
I'd say over the last 6 to 7 years, the stats have really shown that we've sort of moved from this being a large group of hackers who are doing it for their own financial benefit to really becoming cyber businesses. These are cyber criminal organizations that are organized crime.
But who is responsible? Reports from Microsoft and Canada's cybersecurity agency say some attacks are state-sponsored. Microsoft says cyber weapon deployment has been a tactic in Russia's war against Ukraine and signals the dawn of a new age in conflict.
Absolutely. The number of threats have risen incredibly, especially.
Eldon Sprickerhoff is the founder of the company eCentire. He's been doing cybersecurity for 30 years.
So very sophisticated, almost unlimited finance to execute these things. So usually we see things Russia, China, can be Brazil, Romania. There's attacks that happen from and generally some of them are considered state-sponsored as well.
In some cases, companies are extorted for cash. Other times, institutions are hit. Recent Canadian victims include Toronto's Sick Kids Hospital, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, and the Quebec municipality of Westmount. Keach says some companies buy insurance in case of attack, others stow it away to pay ransoms.
You basically pay a premium the same way that you would pay for your car insurance.
But Keach says in case of attack, the best move is not negotiating.
When you end up in that extortion scenario, the right thing to do is don't entertain it.
He says the best offense is defense. Back up all your files offline. That way, if your network is attacked, hackers can't hold your information hostage. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Federal officials have shut down the Elver, or baby eel, fishery in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans says it'll be closed for 45 days. In recent weeks, the DFO has increased monitoring of the fishery over poaching concerns, resulting in multiple seizures and arrests. There are also fears of threats and violence. This week, 2 men were arrested in Nova Scotia after another man was assaulted with a pipe following a dispute over Elver fishing. Elvers are Canada's most valuable fish catch, worth over $5,000 per kilogram. The baby eels are sold to fish farms in Asia, where they are grown to adulthood for food. Well, after months of slipping sales and plunging prices, Canada's housing market is showing signs of a rebound. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, the market is still slower compared to the same time last year. But compared to last month, sales and prices have picked up a bit. Nisha Patel has more.
We see maybe 4 to 6 houses a week.
One more sign that spring has finally arrived. Open houses are back. That's where we found Tyler Portelli at a bustling Toronto showing.
We're still looking. We've made only a few offers, but I want to say we're still hopeful.
With the Bank of Canada pausing interest rate hikes, some home buyers have returned to the market, even if their budgets are tighter because of higher borrowing costs.
I think we're just teetering on the edge of stretching. I think we're sort of in a good place. Hopefully the interest rates don't go up.
The average selling price for a home was a little more than $686,000 in March, slightly higher compared to February, but still down about 15% over the past year.
I'm definitely seeing an uptick in the phone ringing.
Toronto realtor John Panku says while the market normally picks up in the spring, this year is different because sellers are hesitant to list.
People don't want to put their houses on the market necessarily when the market is low, so inventory levels are really low, and they continue to be low.
It's a similar situation in Calgary, where realtor Len T. Wong says the market is extremely tight.
We're heading back into certain sectors into a seller's market.
Alberta's housing market has been steady as tens of thousands of people moved in from Ontario and BC, attracted by the lower cost of living.
People are still coming to town, so we're still getting that same rate of interest, but with no inventory, so that's why prices have stabilized.
The lack of listings also suggests many mortgage holders have been able to cope with the rapid rise in interest rates without being forced into selling, though that could change if the economy slows and the labor market softens. But in the meantime,
we may be hitting the bottom of this downward slope or downward curve.
That's Murtaza Haider, a real estate professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. As Canada sees record population growth, he says surging demand amid scarce housing supply is a problem.
The fix to all of this mess is that we need to build more housing. And that is something not being actively pursued in a way that actually delivers results.
For now, faced with high borrowing costs and higher prices, home buyers aren't likely to see affordability improve anytime soon. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Last month, we told you about the challenges Canadian investors face in trying to keep their portfolios green. A new report by a coalition of environmental groups paints a clearer picture of just how much the banking institutions support fossil fuels. It named the Royal Bank of Canada as the world's largest fossil fuels financer last year. April Merlot is the lead author of the Banking on Climate Chaos report and a research manager at Rainforest Action Network. She's in Massachusetts, and I spoke to her earlier. So, April, let's start with what you mean exactly by fossil fuel financing and how you calculate that.
Yeah, so we talk about financing as lending and underwriting to support the extraction, transportation, processing, distribution of fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, oil sands, liquefied natural gas, and then also companies that have just a little bit of exposure to fossil fuels. So we adjust the transactions to account for what percentage of fossil fuels a particular company is involved with.
Well, the Royal Bank of Canada topped your list for 2022. So just how much money has it put into fossil fuels?
So really actually kind of surprising that RBC jumped to the top of the list. RBC put $42 billion into fossil fuels last year alone, bringing it up to more than $250 billion since the Paris Agreement went into effect in 2016. JP Morgan Chase is still the overall biggest financier of fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement, but we do see a pattern with the Canadian banks of increasing their overall share of financing year on year for fossil fuels in the last couple of years.
Your report found all the big five Canadian banks made significant fossil fuel contributions, and some are actually increasing their financing at a time when many banks all over the world seem to be funding fewer fossil fuel projects. So what do you think could be behind that?
You know, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what's behind it, and the banks aren't exactly telling us what they are doing. They are making commitments to be reducing their exposure to high emitting sectors like fossil fuels, but we don't really see that matched with their actions in terms of financing. Sometimes they tell us that they think they need to help their fossil fuel clients to transition to lower carbon sources of energy. We see their clients, in fact, often increasing their production, making plans to expand their production, and really not making credible climate commitments.
The majority of Canadians bank with these institutions. There will be customers who don't want their money going to fossil fuels. Do they have any power in this situation?
I do think as customers, we really have placed a lot of trust in these institutions. We trust them with our money. And one of the things that we're doing when we trust them with that is asking them to evaluate these risks, climate change being the most significant risk I think we're facing. So as consumers, I really encourage folks to make it clear to their banks that this is important to them. And of course, down the road, if they continue to not be living up to the expectations of their clients, I do think moving your money is always a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Well, the head of Greenpeace Canada has said this report signals it's time for government regulators to step in and require banks to phase out fossil fuel financing. What do you think of that idea?
Absolutely. I see room for regulators to create the conditions in which these investments are going to happen and in which financing happens that really kind of set the guardrails for what a decarbonized economy is going to look like. I also recognize that there's real political headwinds that some of those proposals are facing. And I don't think that we can wait for governments to take action. I think everybody, every institution, society-wide needs to be really proactively making decisions about how to use their money to shift us towards a livable future.
Mm-hmm. April Merlot is the lead author of the Banking on Climate Chaos report and a research manager at Rainforest Action Network. Thank you so much, April.
Yeah, thank you.
Germany is staring down a looming labor crisis. The population is getting older, people are retiring, and there are not enough people to fill those empty jobs. So the country has proposed drastic changes to its citizenship and immigration laws to attract skilled foreign workers. But as Rebecca Collard reports, some say for the reforms to work, attitudes about who is and isn't German will have to change.
It's not long after iftar, the breaking of the fast during Ramadan, and this cafe is buzzing. Patrons sip sweet tea and crack sunflower seeds between their teeth over the sound of Turkish pop music. It would be easy to imagine you were in Istanbul if it weren't for the mix of Turkish and German spoken by patrons like Omar Bayram.
Are you German?
I'm German as a citizen, though. As a citizen, but not really German. Not really.
Bayram was born in Berlin. In fact, it was his grandparents that immigrated to Germany. Some of the millions of what Germany called guest workers brought in after the Second World War to fill the place of the millions of German men killed or maimed fighting for the Nazis. More than 50 years later, Bayram says his grandparents are still not German citizens, and
they don't speak German at all.
Germany is now facing a different kind of labor shortage caused by an aging population. In hopes of attracting skilled workers from outside the EU, Germany is taking a new approach. One partly based on Canada's point system, which weighs factors like age, education, professional experience, and language to pick new immigrants suited to labor market needs. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said Germany needs to increase regular migration and decrease irregular migration. Germany has become a top destination for people fleeing places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria.
So you can see it as a bit of a rethinking of policies in decades past that really did not encourage or allow for the possibility of this more permanent integration.
Natalia Banalescu-Borgdan is with the Migration Policy Institute. She says Germany sold its guest worker program as a way for immigrants to work here for a few years before returning to their home countries with new skills and money. But now Germany wants people to stay.
And so there aren't just the technical aspects to hammer out, but also the symbolic aspects of who is German.
Dennis Atz is co-founder of Who Moves, a startup helping tech workers come to Germany. And he knows those symbolic aspects all too well.
It's very harsh for people migrating to Germany and being a talent in the company, but not in the society.
Until the year 2000, even children born in Germany to immigrant parents didn't get citizenship. And still today, most immigrants can't hold dual citizenship. The new bill would change that. Ed says that is a step in the right direction.
If you bring people to your country and say, okay, if you work here, you can vote, you pay taxes, and you do all the German stuff. Compared to my grandparents, you stay in your flat, you stay in your Turkish community.
I don't think that it's really about a piece of paper citizenship thing. I guess it's more...
Bayram says what's needed is a change in the way Germans feel about people like him.
I actually went to the German military when I was 18, and I still don't feel integrated here, because unless I don't have a German name and I won't look German, I won't be a full member German.
The reforms still need to go through both houses of parliament. Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Berlin.
Police in Merseyside, England, say they've arrested 118 people after a day of protest at the Grand National Horse Race. Dozens of protesters scaled barricades and ran onto the track, delaying the race by 15 minutes. At least 2 people tried to attach themselves to fences using glue and locking devices. The demonstrators are from the animal rights group Animal Rising, which is calling for an end to the Grand National. Police say the arrests are also from another protest before the race, where people glued themselves to a highway, causing traffic delays. Historians and opposition leaders in India are warning the government of Narendra Modi is trying to rewrite history. They say recent changes to school textbooks were made to fit Modi's Hindu nationalist ideology and could damage India's secular identity. The government says it is simply tweaking the curriculum to ease the burden on students still struggling from the COVID-19 pandemic. Freelance reporter Neha Punya has more.
History lessons will be very different for Indian students. Sweeping changes have been made to India's textbooks, most notably chapters on the Mughals, Muslim kings who ruled much of the subcontinent from the 16th to the 19th century, have been heavily edited. Students will still learn about the Mughals, but pages on their achievements, battles they fought, and the workings of their courts have been removed. Some sections linked to the Delhi Sultanate, another Muslim dynasty, have also been deleted. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has labelled the Mughals as Muslim invaders and spoken of the need to rewrite history.
Unfortunately, for years, Indians have been taught a concocted version of history, a conspiracy by those who enslaved Indians to create a sense of inferiority.
High school political science textbooks have also been altered. Mentions of Mahatma Gandhi's belief in Hindu-Muslim unity were removed, as have references to the multiple assassination attempts on Gandhi by Hindu extremists.
There is a political ecosystem in which it is happening.
Professor Aditya Mukherjee is one of many historians criticizing the deletions. He says the changes reflect the ideology of Modi and the ruling BJP and create a lopsided understanding of India's multicultural history.
This desire to portray Indian history as essentially a conflict between Hindus and Muslims, which is a totally erroneous way of looking at it. It was a colonial view. Now, this kind of erasure normally precedes a genocide.
The BJP has repeatedly called India a Hindu nation. Since it came to power in 2014, attacks against Muslims have increased, while many roads and cities named for Muslim rulers have been renamed. Recently, a BJP lawmaker called for two iconic Muslim monuments, the Taj Mahal and the Qutub Minar, to be torn down.
India's history does not begin from Mughals and end with the Mughal. They are a very small part. That part is very insignificant in terms of the values they cherished.
The BJP's Rakesh Sinha insists the textbook changes will give students a broader understanding of India's long history.
We have a 10,000 years old civilization. So history has to address 10,000 years.
The syllabus for modern Indian history has also been edited. All references to the 2002 riots in Gujarat have been purged. More than 1,000 people died in that violence, most of them Muslims. Prime Minister Modi led the state of Gujarat at the time. The Education Board says the textbook changes were made to ease the burden on students after the COVID-19 pandemic. But with general elections coming up next year, critics like Mukherjee see it as an attempt to weaponize history for political gains. Neha Punia for CBC News, New Delhi.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. The 11th annual Canadian Screen Awards televised special is tomorrow, celebrating the best in Canadian film and television. It's a big deal for actors and creators in this country, even if it doesn't always get the attention the nominees deserve. Eli Glasner spoke to some of them about why it's important for Canadian audiences to support homegrown talent.
It's just been like a surreal dream come true.
After a long hibernation, the Canadian Screen Awards are back in person with much to celebrate.
Why, me, sir? What night is it? It's Rejects Night. Ooh,
You watch me. Follow my every move.
Buzzy films such as I Like Movies, Brother, and Infinity Pool are making waves. But take a look at the actors in competition. Names such as Casey Collins, Steve LaPlante, Marsha Stephanie Blake might be known in the industry, but not to the general public.
In Canada, we're very big on the auteur, the director, writer, screenwriter.
Canadian soap star Tanya Williams went from acting to founding the Real World Film Festival. She's seen the way other countries spotlight their talent and says Canada is missing a critical part.
You want your series or you want your movie to be watched by as many people as possible. And those people are going to be drawn to actors that they've heard of, that they recognize, that they've seen in things.
That responsibility falls to the new CEO of the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television, Tammy Frick.
It's my first year leading this organization into this wonderful week. I'm still smiling and
It's all great.
The CSAs are like Canada's Oscars and Emmys, all rolled into one. One of the week's biggest winners is the film Brother. The movie, directed by Clement Vergaux, set a new Canadian Screen Award record, bringing home 12 awards.
For me, I would want to see all my colleagues who have worked tremendously hard, who have dedicated themselves, be recognized live.
But this year, the live broadcast gala has been replaced by a pre-packaged show on Sunday, hosted by Samantha Bee, on tape. Frick says it's time to try something new.
We love to hear people giving acceptance speeches. Sometimes we know them, sometimes we don't. But wouldn't it be great if the whole 60 minutes is highly entertaining and you get a broader scope of everything that's happening?
CSA winner Lamar Johnson has seen his star rise thanks to his appearance in HBO's The Last of Us. Raised in Scarborough by his mom, an immigrant from Jamaica, Brother gave him a role that reflected his own story.
To be able to see yourself on screen is a big thing, you know. I remember when I was younger, I watched the commercial and I saw a little black kid that looked like me in that commercial, not necessarily knowing the seed that is subconsciously placed inside of me.
Filmmaker Anthony Shim, who directed the award-winning Rice Boy Sleeps, says if audiences want to see Canadian stories starring homegrown talent, they need to support them.
If you do love the movies and if you love going to the movie theaters, then please, you got to go and you got to support. That's really the only way that we can keep this thing going.
As the work to help Canadian stars shine a little brighter continues. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
I do not understand what it is. I don't know.
It's not you, Tom York, or the rest of the band Radiohead. But guitarist Johnny Greenwood is into another phase of his life, and it involves olive oil. And then Greenwood found himself living on a farm in Italy for the last 8 years, working alongside his friends and family to harvest and press olives into liquid gold. Seriously, the stuff costs £60, or about $100 Canadian per litre. Greenwood's posted online that it's only a few bottles, and it's only available in the UK, but he's really proud of the final product. And he acknowledges it does seem to be a trend for rock stars of a certain age to start creating pricey produce.
I hope that someone gets my message in a bottle, yeah.
And by rock stars of a certain age, he means Sting, who along with wife Trudy Styler runs a Tuscan estate that churns out wine, honey, and award-winning olive oil. But he could also be talking about Blur bassist Alex James.
Lives in a house, very big house in the country. Watching afternoon repeats and the 38s in the country.
James moved to a house in the country years ago, and he now spends his time making lots of cheese. Telling a British morning show he's very happy with his reinvention.
Half the time people recognise me, they want to talk about Blur, and the other half they want to know where to get decent cheese. Whenever you find something that you really, really love, you've got to kind of hang on to it. So I remember telling my mum that I was leaving college to be in a band, and it was going. She said, "Don't be ridiculous." And then telling my band I was leaving to go and make cheese, they said, "Don't be ridiculous." But you know, I think if you love something, you find a way of making it work.
Some decent advice from one artisan to another as Johnny Greenwood takes the first steps in his new career journey. Because anyone can play guitar, but not anyone can make olive oil. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.